Welcome back, everybody. This is Module 3 of Day 2 of the Accelerate Jumpstart program for planning and deploying Office 365. I have Fulvio, our instructor, with me. We're continuing now on deploying SSO. So this is part 2 of this session. Fulvio?
Thank
we
you.
were deploying Federation Server Farm when we stopped last time.
Okay. Thank you, Stefan. Just something that I want to point out. We received many questions in the Q&A about the service account that we need to use for ADFS, in particular about membership in this case. So, as we said, you can call it whenever you want. It's not a problem. Just click on it, and as you can see, it's a regular user. So, just to be more sure again, click on Properties, Member Of. As you can see, it's just a domain user, nothing more. So not an administrator or something else. Okay, let's continue with the presentation, or better, the configuration of the Federation Server Farm. In this case, we almost done the configuration of the internal server. So we installed the Windows Server 2008, we installed the IIS, we created and installed the certificate, we downloaded and installed the PowerShell and also the Federation Server ADFS package. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. We also started the install or installation of the ADFS package as an internal ADFS server. Okay. But Federation is still not up. It's just the infrastructure ready, but no Federation in place at the moment. What we need to do now is to complete the Federation using the PowerShell that we downloaded in the module before, the Microsoft Online Server Federation PowerShell. So we will need to launch the PowerShell. My personal suggestion here is to use the PowerShell directly on the ADFS server, because this will avoid potential problems related to firewall connectivity and so on. If you use the PowerShell on the ADFS server, will save a lot of time, in my opinion, from my personal experience. Yep. So you just need to fire the PowerShell, connect to the Office 365 PowerShell service on the cloud. So we are using some stored variable here, so credential, get credential. So it will store this command will save your credential inside a variable. Then we will connect to the Microsoft Online Service using the credential that we stored before. So these two commands are linked. This command is only used if you are not running the PowerShell on the ADFS server. If you're running this PowerShell command from somewhere else, you will need to specify which one is the primary ADFS 2.0 server. That's why I strongly suggest you to run the PowerShell command directly on the ADFS server. This will avoid to use this particular switch. Then we will need to convert our domain from a standard domain to a federated domain. So Office 365 will understand and learn that the domain, for example, contoso.com, will not be anymore a cloud identity, but a federated identity, and will need to search for authentication and credential on our on-premise system. This is really important, because it's the command that will establish the federation between the on-premise system and the Office 365 environment. If everything goes in the right direction, we can check that federation is working in the right way with this particular command. So get MSO federation property and then the name of the domain that we want to check. So get MSO federation property, for example, contoso.com. So we will have a list of all the endpoint, type of federation in place, federation is running, and so on, directly inside the PowerShell window. So the results will be something like federation working, but before completing the internal configuration of the ADFS server, we just need to perform one last operation. We need to create a new record inside our internal DNS system, a new A or AAA record inside our DNS system, because we need to tell to the system that if a client inside our corporate network will need to resolve in some way sts.contoso.com, will need to point not outside our organization but to the ADFS server. So just to make you an example, here again in front of you there is the domain controller, again with the DNS panel on it. If I go to gpsdemo.net, that is the name of my domain, you can see that I created before one E record that is called the Italy STS, that is pointing to a local address and not an internet address. So if a client will try to resolve and connect to the ADFS server internally, will contact an internal server, the internal ADFS server. Should be easy. Okay, then if an end user or a client will try to connect to the ADFS internally, we receive something like this. So the user will be recognized. You can choose to keep the user signed on, and then you just need to click on sign in at, this is a possible name for STS or an ADFS server, .gpsdemo.net. So the end user just need to click here to gain access to the Office 365 portal and Outlook, Exchange, SharePoint, and so on. We just completed the deployment of the internal ADFS server. So internally, all the users can access to Office 365 services from within inside the organization. Easy, more or less.
Straightforward.
Straightforward. It's good. Then let's continue this time with the Active Directory Federation Server Proxy. So we want, for example, to provide access to Office 365 for users that are outside our company, that are located outside our company, but have an account inside our Active Directory. So let's continue. It's similar, the procedure to install the ADFS proxy, but a bit different in the end when you perform the configuration of the ADFS package, because you need to configure it as a federation server proxy, not a federation server. Let's continue here. So, as we said, we are speaking about the server that is outside the organization, is not inside the corporate network, and is part of a workgroup for security reasons. There are no logon information stored in any way on the federation server proxies, because all the information or the sensitive information are inside the corporate network. Okay? And as we said, for the ADFS proxy, we can have in front of us a network load balancer, or a software network load balancer, or an hardware network load balancer, or as we said before, a virtualization solution also here. So virtualize the proxy.
Right.
Make sense? We need to deploy a federation server proxy when an organization will need to use Outlook client. Yes. If we need to access to Office 365 using Outlook clients in general, we will need to deploy the ADFS server proxy. If we are just accessing to Office 365 internally using the website, it's not a problem. If we are using a rich client, we will need to deploy the ADFS server proxy. If one end user needs to access to Office 365 from home or public location, as we said many times, or for example, if they need to access to Office 365 using mobile devices. Makes sense, again. So, let's just underline some important information here. Need to be deployed in the edge network, so outside organization. the communication between the federation server and the federation server's proxy, both servers must be able to communicate over TCP 443, so secure communication between one server and the other. So secure communication. Crypto. The DFS component, again, should be deployed on Windows Server 2008 or Windows Server 2008 R2. As before, no problem here. We need to install again IIS 7 or 7.5 on our server, and we will need to export and import the same certificate that we created for the internal federation server farm. So we will reuse the same certificate internally and externally. Make sense? So,
makes sense, yeah.
Certificate reuse is important.
So from a security perspective, it's SSL communication with port 443 that we enable. Yeah. There's there's two-factor authentication that you can enable through ADFS.
Yeah.
2.0 proxy,
yeah, but
it will not be part of what we discussed today.
No, right? we can do that. Option. We can do that. It's just an option, and two-factor authentication is something that is related to user. Usually, you can enable it on the infrastructure, and user will be able to access to the services in a different way, not using only username and password. Okay, but it's possible. The answer is that. Okay.
Yep.
Let's continue. So it's easy. Again, I need to download the same packages that we downloaded before. 3 versions, remember that. Download, run, next. I need to accept again the EULA. This time we will select Federation Server Proxy because we are going to deploy something outside our organization, in the outside the corporate network. Easy. It will install required component, again, not IIS probably because we already installed it and imported the certificate. Install in action. Then we need to start the wizard here to configure the proxy server because we just installed the package again. To perform this operation, we need to do two important tasks. The first one is to configure the host file on the Windows Server 2008 server on the ADFS proxy server. The second one is configure the ADFS proxy. This is easy again. I will fire the ADFS proxy now. Here. Okay. There is an hyperlink already ready here that will point to Windows System 32 driver, and I will go to edit the file host on the ADFS proxy, like in this case, open as Notepad is okay. I will need to insert something like this. So when the ADFS proxy will need to resolve this particular address, will route the communication not to internet, but will route the communication to the internal network, so to the federation server inside my corporate network. So this IP can change for sure, but if this server will try to resolve this address, will point to our federation server, to our internal federation server address. Easy again. We are doing this particular procedure because, as we said, this machine is outside the corporate network and is not domain joined, so it's part of our workgroup, so it's not listening and is not applying domain DNS that we modified before. Okay? The second step that I need to fulfill is this one. So start and ADFS Federation Server Proxy Configuration Wizard. So launch the configuration to configure the proxy here. So it's easy. Again, here the procedure is just next. And keep in mind that a federation server and a federation server proxy cannot be configured on the same computer. We already know that we need at least 2 computers to perform this kind of environment.
Right.
Okay. And you need also a federation service, or better, a federation server already deployed inside your company, because the proxy will need to connect to something else. Okay?
That's right.
Okay, federation service name. we already defined many times our federation service name when we installed the ADFS server inside our company. In this case, will be something like this. Just a second, I need to find the right one. Oh, we have a problem here with the keyboard. Give me just a second because I need to insert. I have a problem with the keyboard here. I need to find the right. Should be a matter of second because it's not the
what are you looking for? Which symbol?
This one, found. This one. Okay. This is the name of our federation service.
Right. You said STS is something we use, but there's no naming convention.
Yeah, it's not a naming convention. Usually we use STS when we are referring to ADFS in general, but it's okay. We just need to insert here the name of the federation server that we already created inside our corporate network, and this server will use the setting that we just applied on the host file to resolve this particular address. So when I type italy-sts.gpsdemo.net, will resolve a local address, not an internet address. Let's continue testing connection. Okay, the federation service was contacted successfully, so there is a communication from the outside of the company to inside the company. So a communication over 443. Okay?
SSL.
Yeah, SSL. Just, okay, I can contact the other server. Everything is working here. What I need to do now is insert here the name of the service that we just created. Do you remember that when we created the federation server inside our company, and in the real beginning of this module, we created a service account for the ADFS. So was
I think we call it ADFS.
Yeah, perfect.
Right?
We have
keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Yeah, perfect.
Again, it just needs to have regular user permissions.
Yeah, regular user permission here. Let me find. I need to remember the symbol here. Okay, it's easy. Give me just a second. ADFS is the name of the user. This should be the password. Few seconds. Okay, the connection from the proxy to the internal network has been completed correctly. I needed to specify the full username, so domain GPS demo in my case / username, because this machine again is outside the domain, is in a workgroup. So I needed to type the full username and his password. Then I will not hit here next because I don't want to reconfigure this particular machine. If I click next instead, the wizard will complete the configuration like before, so stopping the service, restarting the services, and so on. Make sense?
Straightforward.
Okay. Straightforward, yeah. The last operation that I need to perform now before having the proxy working 100% is to go again to GoDaddy, for example, and create a CNAME record with italy-sts.gpsdemo.net that will point to the proxy server. Makes sense? So from my organization, when I'll try to resolve the STS server, I will be redirected to the proxy. Make sense?
Yep.
Let's see the results. The results here is an external user from maybe not from home, let's say that will try to access to Office 365 using corporate credentials. So it will just type his username from outside the organization. The system will recognize that the system is federated with the Office 365, like in this case, and I will be asked to authenticate on the infrastructure. So the procedure will be the external user will be redirected here on the proxy server. We will see this screen in the next slide. The server proxy will route the communication to the internal network load balancer, then to one of the two ADFS server, will check credential on Active Directory, and will give back the result. So when the user will try to connect to Office 365, we connect to Office 365, then to the server proxy, and we receive this particular screen in front of him. So we'll have a sort of form-based authentication page. So he will need just to insert here username and password. Username here could be domain slash username or the UPN. So fulvio@mydomain.net.com whenever I want.
And both of those versions will work.
We work, yeah, both without any problem. And then the user will be able to access to the system without any particular problem. Make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. Let's continue with some important deployment considerations that are useful also for the certification, but not only, also for work in real with this specific environment or infrastructure. Wow, minimum number of servers. One of the questions that we received during the module before was about how many ADFS server we should deploy inside our organization. So if you have fewer than 1,000 users, you can have one dedicated network load balancing server, so 2 server and 2 server. Makes sense?
Yep.
If I'm growing the number of the users, I should start increasing the number of the ADFS servers inside my organization. As I said before, the maximum number of dedicated federation servers is 5 at the moment. Okay?
Yep.
Make sense?
Maybe one thing to clarify, maybe that people might be confused, it says 0 dedicated federation servers. I think the key is dedicated, so we're talking about virtual machines.
We can
for,
talk about
federation servers.
Yeah.
So you need 2 Active Directory federation servers as virtual machines in the first case here.
Yeah.
But they can be virtual, they don't have to be dedicated.
Yeah.
Only if you go beyond
it's perfect.
1,000 users.
It's not a requirement to use a physical physical machine for ADFS. It's also supported without any problem to use a virtual machine for this kind of environment.
Great.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect guidance. Yeah.
Then here we have some important operations that we can perform on our ADFS environment. For example, we can add a subdomain for single sign-on using our current environment. So, for example, we just federated gpsdemo.net. Using our current infrastructure, we can also add italy.gpsdemo.net or also fergo.gpsdemo.net using our current infrastructure. So ADFS support the first level domain and subdomain using the same infrastructure. Is nice. You can convert a domain to a single sign-on domain. You can federate a domain between your local Active Directory and Office 365. We did that using PowerShell in the first part of the presentation. We can also convert back a domain from single sign-on to standard. This can happen. For example, if your server farm has been destroyed, completely destroyed, all your users will not be able to access to Office 365 because you lost all the EDFS servers inside your organization. You can convert back using the PowerShell a domain from federated, so single sign-on, to standard. In that case, the command that you will need to fire to launch using the PowerShell will require to generate a text file with username and password. The PowerShell command will take care of generating a temporary password for users in this case. So again, be prepared for ADFS. If you plan to deploy ADFS inside your company, it's a long-term commitment and you must be ready to afford it and maintain it working during the time. So I would strongly suggest to avoid this particular situation when you need to come back from single sign-on to standard identities. It's supported, you can do that, but it's not suggested for many reasons, because you need also to communicate then the temporary password to all your users. And this is not a good operation, and it could be really time expensive. What else? You can get ADFS properties for your organization, as we said also during the demo before. So get federation properties, the type of federation, the token that will be used, and so on. You can also update the properties for a single sign-on domain. There is a PowerShell command that will update the federation properties in case you are changing the ADFS server because you had a hardware problem, for example, or if you are changing the certificate. You don't need to rebuild everything, just update the properties related to ADFS. This is nice to improve the availability, but also the environment itself, because you can work on it without any problem. What else? You can, usually when you deploy an ADFS environment inside your organization, the system, the package will install a Windows internal database as default, because it's free, because usually not so many organizations maybe are using from the beginning more than X users and so on. For example, if we are using in this moment Windows internal database can manage up to 5 servers per farm and has many limits in it. If we instead want to provide a better support for failover and so on, we can use SQL feature to provide clustering, mirroring, better performances, also because SQL, maybe in standard or in enterprise edition, offer better performances over Windows internal database. Windows internal database can only use it in this case for the ADFS system and can't be shared for other services, for example. So it's just bounded or binded to this service. Mm-hmm. Before leaving this session, I would like to give you some advice or some idea about the environment we are using to test ADFS and the infrastructure. What I want to show you is the lab environment. The lab environment for ADFS is composed by, let me say, 4 virtual machines. The first one is a domain controller with ADFS server on it. This is not a suggested scenario, because having a domain controller with the ADFS role on it, it's supported, but it's not suggested for security reasons, because it's always better to avoid to use domain controller and use domain controller for other operation other than user management and so on. And you are also in some way exposing the domain controller to possible threat. Is possible. What else? We have an ADFS proxy inside our environment. That is the one that we just used with Windows 2008 R2 on it. As you can see, just for lab purposes, the environment that we are using is composed by 4 virtual machines with something like 2 GB per virtual machine, not so much memory used here, for example. Mm-hmm. And they are using from 1 to 2 core per each virtual machine. So it's an easy environment to be deployed and tested, the one related at least to ADFS and single sign-on. You can build it using a regular desktop server or workstation with a good amount of memory. Okay. What else? Here I'm using DirSync in 32-bit version in this case, and as you can see, the memory that is using is not so much big. So we are using again here 2 GB of RAM to run the whole system. I have also a client here that is a Windows 7 client with for example Office, Outlook and so on, to test the ADFS internally in my organization. To publish the whole environment outside my corporate network, I'm using a TMG server in front of it. So TMG that will handle all the requests to the ADFS proxy, and also I will use TMG also for the Exchange environment and so on. So TMG to handle all the requests coming from the outside, so a public IP that will publish the whole environment, and for virtual machine for ADFS. Okay, I believe we covered more or less all the topics that are required for ADFS. Do we have any question about?
Yes, let's go into a couple of those questions we have seen here to round out the context and the content. Let's start with this one here. I think that was pretty interesting. So it says here in the slide deck does not seem to reflect the correct method to add routable domain UPN. It shows open Active Directory users and computers. Would we need to do this? Oh.
No problem.
All right. That sentence is not correct. What we need to do for this, AD domains and trusts?
Yeah.
So
you need, maybe it's not so clear. We need to...
Maybe you can demonstrate that live.
We can just check that. It's not a problem.
Shed some light on this.
Yeah, it's not a problem. We need to add an additional UPN to our infrastructure using a domain controller. So I need to have administrative credential here to access here.
Yes, yeah.
Then close this one and access and add the additional UPN using Active Directory domain and trust here. Then select the top left area here, properties, and then add additional UPN suffixes to my infrastructure. Okay. Then once I added my single or multiple UPN suffixes here, I will get something like this. So if I go to user and computer, I create or I select an existing user like Stefan, as we did in the first module. Then in account, I can select the right UPN or the UPN I want. If I want that this user will be able to work with Office 365 and single sign-on, I should choose a routable domain. Make sense?
Yeah.
Hope it's clear. Oh, there is another good resource that I want to suggest you before taking the exam. Could be really useful for you to maybe to test the DFS, to build an environment and so on. We tried to cover in more or less 2 hours the whole procedure to let me say deploy an easy, a simple ADFS environment just to understand the big picture of the environment. But what I want to suggest you is to have a look to the Office 365 deployment guide that we used also before. Give me just a second that I try to, it's not a problem, I'll re-download it. Give me just a few seconds, because on the Office 365 deployment guide, just after the middle, there is the whole procedure to deploy an ADFS server farm step by step. So what you need to deploy to deploy the federation server internally, externally, step by step, how to configure a certificate, what kind of certificate you need to use, is a step by step procedure, and is well done. Give me just a second, I will download it for you. Other question in the meantime?
Yeah, I don't want to go too much off course here when you're downloading the deployment guide.
Okay.
And obviously, if you just bing it, that's how you can find it for anybody who wants to look at the deployment guide.
Okay. It's here. It's can I please have my screen? Okay, my screen on. This is the deployment guide. I strongly suggest you to have a look to the deployment guide for enterprises before attending or testing the exam. More or less after the middle of the deployment guide, we have the procedure to configure the ADFS inside a corporate network. So let's start, for example, from here. We have to prepare a UPN attribute, what we just did in the demo. Deploy the federation server farm with all the procedures, step-by-step requirement, join the federation server to the domain, all the procedure that just tested using the demo or the slide. Okay?
Right.
It's really, really important, and is called Deployment Guide for Enterprises.
Perfect. So that's the best reference to go there.
Yeah.
So another question we got coming in is about the how to configure how to federate multiple TDLs or UPNs. There is a switch called support multiple domains.
Correct.
Can we show that and talk a little bit about that?
Okay, we can't for just for there is a problem with that. The problem is that actually the environment is already running at the moment, so I should more or less destroy my environment to show that procedure at the moment. There is a switch, as our friend correctly said, that will enable ADFS through the PowerShell to accept multiple domains. So not just one, but multiple domains on the same ADFS infrastructure. This is possible, but keep in mind that to have that switch, you will need to install before the ADFS package on your Windows server and then launch Windows Update, because you will get the multiple domain support with an update of the ADFS package. So the basic will not be sufficient to obtain the multiple domain support. Make sense?
Yes. Thanks for clarifying that.
Other question?
So we have other questions. A lot of questions are related actually to ADFS proxy, when to use it, when it's needed. Obviously, if we have internal users only, all we need is ADFS and ADFS farm for high availability. Only if we have external users, domain users that are trying to access Office 365